Good evening, everyone. This is James Rattray, the chairman of the Soldiers of Killiecrankie group. We were constituted because of our battlefield at Killiecrankie. This is the second part of what will probably be a 10-part series telling you about the battle and taking you over step by step over the battlefield. Just to remind you, I'm telling the story based on two first-hand accounts. Cameron of Lochiel, he was on the Jacobite side, James VII's side. We've got his first-hand account here. We've got General Hugh McKay. He was supporting William and Mary, who was made commander of Scottish government forces by the Scottish Council of Estates and Parliament. The third book I'll be referring to is The Art of Warfare in the Time of Marlborough, because this talks about infantry tactics and everything else that Hugh McKay and Cameron of Lochiel don't talk about. In the first session, I explained why there were two monarchs. I also explained to you who the two commanders were for each of the monarchs to try and win them Scotland, because they're both fighting for Scotland, and why the two armies are racing to get to Blair, the castle at Blair. In this session, behind us, I'm standing at the Pass of Killiecrankie. Many of you will know it. Mackay, with his Scottish government army, has to march through this pass, and he knows that he can be attacked by the Jacobites, by Dundee with his Highland regiments. So in this session, I'm going to talk about what the two armies leave behind in their race to get to Blair, how the Jacobites' arms and provisions are intercepted and lost, the first shots of the Battle of Killiecrankie were fired here in the pass. At the end of the first session, the two commanders had been sent letters. General Hugh McKay was sent letters by Lord Murray, whose tenants wouldn't let him into his own home at the Castle of Blair. And the defenders, the people in the house at Castle of Blair, sent letters to Dundee and the Highlanders, asking them to make all speed to the castle to relieve them. So I'm sorry to say, Charlie Beatty, I'm going to wear my lovely hat, and this signifies what General Hugh McKay said. General Hugh McKay said, on getting news about Blair, he proposed to himself to be master of Castle of Blair, which would keep the Athol men from joining the enemy. He marched to Athol without 4 troops of dragoons and 2 of horse that had not joined him yet. And these horse and dragoons, cavalry, were significant, and you'll hear throughout this story about the missing horse and the dragoons from both sides. I'm now going to tell you what Cameron of Lochiel had to say. Yes, my lovely woolly hat, so you know who's talking. Cameron of Lochiel tells us that Dundee received regular news of General Hugh's army's progress, which consisted of 6 or 7 regiments of foot and 2 levied troops of English horse. All accounts are unclear exactly what the numbers of General Hugh McKay's army was. Numbers vary between 3,000 and 4,500 men, which is significantly more than Dundee had. But I just want to spend a moment and ask you to consider, if you had 4,000 men, how would they march? You can just imagine a long line stretching for miles. So I went to the Art of Marlborough's book, Warfare, and had a look. And what they said was battalions would march in columns of 8 to 20 feet wide. And you could imagine a clump of men marching along. And the roads couldn't accommodate them, so they had to march to the side. At the front of these battalions, they would be led by the grenadiers. And you've also got to remember, at this time, 1 in 5 of the infantrymen were pikemen, those people with the long poles. Regarding mounted soldiers, there were 2 types: the horse, the cavalry, and the dragoons. The dragoons were mounted infantry, they weren't cavalry. Basically, they were using horses to get to one location to the next and then dismount for rapid deployment. So we'll go back to what Hugh McKay said. The first day he left St Johnstone, which is Perth today, and stopped the night opposite Dunkeld. Meanwhile, Dundee knew well that if the castle of Blair was reduced by Mackay, it would cut off all intelligence betwixt the North and the West Highlands. So Dundee, Lochiel tells us, was in a hurry to get there. Dundee made haste with clans he had about him, something amounting to 1,800 men, so almost half of what Mackay's army was. He left orders for the rest of his army to follow him with all speed through the day, because their rendezvous was days later. And he said of himself and his clan, he, Lochiel, had none of his men except his Lochaber men with him, and they did not exceed 240. But upon the first alarm, he dispatched his eldest son John and several messengers into the adjacent countries of Morven, Swinart, Ardnamurchan, and other places through which the Camerons were dispersed, to bring them all with all haste. So you can see both armies have left without everyone. The Jacobite, the Highland army with Dundee, left without all the clans there. And Mackay left Perth without his dragoons and cavalry. And that would probably be quite telling later on in the battle. So Lochiel tells us about the Irish. Dundee was on a quick march to Atholl, but before he entered the country, Major General Cannon overtook him with 300 new-raised, naked, undisciplined Irishmen, which had this bad effect, that the clans who believed they were to be supported by a powerful army from Ireland with arms, ammunition, and all other provisions, saw themselves miserably disappointed. But they were further discouraged when they heard that the ships that King James had sent over with plenty of meal, beef, butter, cheese, and other necessities were taken by English ships in the Isle of Mull, where General Cannon had loitered so long that the enemy had information on their arrival and captured them. Lochiel continues, but brave Dundee was not to be discouraged by accidents of this nature. He arrived at the castle of Blair on the 27th of July, 1689. Now, what did Hugh McKay tell us in his book? Hugh McKay tells us 12 o'clock at night on the 26th, he received news from Lord Murray that Dundee had entered Atholl. Lord Murray promised to place a guard here on this pass, because the pass was crucial to getting to Blair, the castle of Blair on the other side. And he said at midnight, General Mackay immediately dispatched Lieutenant Lauder with his men to better secure the pass. I'm going to go back to Dundee and that terrible hat as I struggle to put it on. Lochiel tells us Dundee called, once he got to Blair, he called all his principal officers together, asking for their advice about whether they should march directly forward to fight the enemy or wait for the other clans to join them. He says the officers who'd been trained in command of regular troops were unanimous that they should wait for the other clans, saying it was prudent to risk an engagement against an army of disciplined men that exceeded their number by more than a half. He also pointed out that the Highlanders were in want of rations and were exhausted after the long march. It would be madness, they said, to fancy the Highlanders could match any one quality that belonged to a body of well-disciplined regular troops conducted by an experienced general such as McKay. Lochiel tells us Dundee then turned to him, Lochiel, for advice. Lochiel, at the time of the battle, was over 60 years of age, very experienced man. He'd fought with Montrose. And Lochiel says that he told McKay and the other chiefs and officers to fight immediately, for our men are in heart. They are so far from being afraid of their enemy that they are eager and keen to engage them, lest they escape their hands as they have done so often. Though we have few men, they are good, and I can venture to assure your lordship that not one of them will fail you. He said, it's better to fight at the disadvantage of even 1 to 3 than delay it till McKay's dragoons and cavalry have time to join him. So there, the dragoons and cavalry, the instant they could be seen as king pieces on the battlefield. So Lochiel continued, be assured, my lord, that if once we are fairly engaged, we will either lose our army or carry a complete victory. And let us take this occasion to show our zeal and courage in the cause of our king and country. Because of course they were fighting for Scotland, but for a different monarch. Both sides were fighting for Scotland, but they wanted to be ruled by different people. Lochiel tells us, after what he said, it was unanimously agreed to fight. Lochiel tells us one other very interesting interaction that he did. And if Bonnie Dundee had listened to this one, history may well have been very different. Lochiel tells us he begged to be heard before the council broke up. And in quotes he put, I humbly beg leave, in the name of these gentlemen, the voice of your council and their orders, that you do not engage personally Viscount Dundee. On your lordship depends the fate not only of this little army, but also of our country and our king. Lochiel said he was seconded by the whole of the council in this motion that Dundee should not fight. But Dundee begged to be heard. And again in quotes, this is what Dundee is said to have said. I beg leave of you, however, to allow me to give one display to the king, my master, that I have one opportunity of convincing the brave clans that I can hazard my life in that service as freely as the meanest of them. Allow me this single favour, and I here promise, upon my honour, never again to risk my person while I have that of commanding you. And he just puts a few lines, Lochiel just puts a few lines at the end. The council, finding him inflexible, broke up. So Dundee was determined to fight that day. How different we can all imagine things would have been if the Highland clans had retained a leader such as Dundee. Going back to Hugh McKay, he tells us next morning at break, he marched, having dispatched orders to Perth to hasten up his 6th troop of horse. And he arrived here at the other end of the pass at 10 a.m. in the morning. So they must have been up very early. You've got to think it's 27th of July. 27th of July, so sunrise, what time is that? 3, 4 in the morning, but they got here by 10 a.m. I assume that's the advance guard of his 4,500 or 3,500 men. And he says, on arriving at the pass, Lieutenant Colonel Lauder advised him that none of Murray's men were guarding the pass when he arrived. So Lord Murray hadn't fulfilled what he said by protecting the guard. Lochiel tells us all armies coming from the south had to pass through this pass of Killiecrankie, and any more than 3 men abreast would have been difficult to march through the pass. So I was talking earlier about being 8 wide and 20 wide. Some of these regiments would march to get to a place at speed ready for battle. But through this pass, they'd have to be extended because they could not march any wider than 3. He also said any army might be stopped in its march through the pass by a few resolute men. There's no way for any army from the south to march into Atholl other than through this pass. The Pass of Killiecrankie was absolutely crucial to any army heading north. The Jacobites knew that. McKay knew that. McKay needed to check that the pass was clear, and Dundee was not going to ambush him there. So McKay sent 200 men from Earl of Leven to fortify Lido so they could enter and march up the pass and check it was clear. After a while, Lido returned saying the pass was clear. General McKay tells us, as he marched his army, he put them through in the following sequence: Balfour, Ramsay's, Kenmore battalions first, then Belhaven's horse, Leven's and his own McKay's battalion next. And his own battalion was commanded by his brother. Then after that, there was 1,200 baggage train horses, which had to be guarded by Annandale's horse and Hastings' regiment. And I quote what McKay said: "The enemy might detach men to attack the baggage. Also, if the country folk, seeing it was insufficiently guarded, might fall on it and plunder it." I just want you to think about this pass. These troops that McKay had, a lot of them were new, they were not experienced troops, they were lowlanders, they were being brought into a country which had a very different culture to their own. Gaelic was not their language, the English was, and they were coming through this pass. They'd been brought up with tales of the Highlanders and Montrose and the feats that they achieved. So they were asked to come through this pass here, and steep sides on it, expecting at any moment to be ambushed. What Lochiel doesn't tell us, but other accounts do, was that Dundee, some of his clan chiefs and officers suggested that they should attack McKay's army in the pass here. And Dundee had to remind them of the Highland code of their ancestors. Never to attack a foe who could not defend himself on equal terms. And he said, let them come through the pass. And we'll talk about that story on the other side on Sunday. I just want to account to you another piece of tradition, local tradition, Atholl tradition, that General Hugh McKay's army came through the pass and they lost one single horseman. And that was shot by an Atholl man, Ern Ban Beg Macran. Sorry, Rollian, for the pronunciation. It could be much better, I'm sure. I'm not a Gaelic speaker. Having crossed the rivulet at the Garry, he brought down his victim. He then went home brought down his victim with a single shot. He then went home and took no further part in the battle. So there you have it. They're now coming through the pass. And on Sunday night at 7 o'clock, I'll meet you all on the other side of the pass and I'll tell you what happened there. Because Dundee had a plan. McKay was trying to work out how to position his troops. And we'll then go into that then. So thank you all very much. Thank you all for sharing this and your comments, which are much appreciated. And I look forward to seeing you all on Sunday night, 7 o'clock.